Usually when people do a 0 EXP run for Pokemon, they use an action replay code to completely remove the EXP gain, which got me thinking, is it actually possible to complete a 0 EXP run of Pokemon by just using smart in-game tactics to prevent EXP gain? My rules for this challenge were if I ever gain EXP, I must reset my game, and also to make the battles more interesting, I'm going to be playing on set mode. Additionally, in battle, I'm banning the use of healing and battle items unless one would be necessary to not gain EXP, and finally, I'll be playing the game on challenge mode, which will add more Pokemon to some of the major boss fights for a big difficulty increase. Okay, so now is a good time to like and subscribe, and let's get started with this run with the starter choice. This decision wasn't really important, I just went with Snivy for his high speed. Immediately after this, our rival Hugh challenges us to a battle, and if I win this fight, I'll gain experience. So I just used Leer to do no damage, and I let Tepig defeat me with its tackles. After some tutorials, I could catch some Pokemon and head past Floccesy Town to reach Route 20, where I was faced with the first battle that I had to win. And right now, I would gain experience for winning this fight. But there was a way I could beat this fight without gaining experience, as if I fated my Pokemon to a recoil move, no Pokemon would be around to gain the experience. The problem is, right now, none of the currently available Pokemon have a recoil move. So how would I beat this fight? I needed to use Struggle, which only becomes available when a Pokemon is out of usable moves. So to make it available, I had to run over to Route 19 and waste all of my Snivy's PP on wild Pokemon. The issue here is every battle I would slowly lose HP, and since my money is limited right now, I can't just buy potions, and if I heal with a Pokemon Center, that will restore my PP, making it necessary for me to save before encountering a wild Pokemon, and if the wild Pokemon attacked me instead of using Growl or Tail Whip, I would reset to avoid my Snivy from taking too much damage. This process took me around an hour, and while doing this, I dropped my Snivy to low HP, which would be useful for the first fight. My plan to win here was to use some Patrat and Purloins to lower the enemy's attack, defense, and also lower their HP enough that Snivy could win with Struggle, and since Snivy was in range of Struggle's 25 max HP recoil, he went down at the same time as Patrat, and we avoided gaining any experience. For the next trainer and most early game fights, I repeated the same strategy as the last fight of getting Snivy in Struggle range, then in battle lower the enemy's stats and HP, then end the battle with Struggle. With this trainer defeated, we had access to a few very important Pokemon in the grass in Floccesy Ranch, with Riolu who could do some cheesing with counter, Mareep that could support us with paralysis, and Lillipup who just has good stats and the same type attack boost with frustration, the strongest move I could use for the first gym. Once I was done catching, I headed forward initiating a fight with Hugh. I didn't really do anything different for this fight other than inflicting them with paralysis to reduce their speed, so later my Snivy would outspeed and give me a win. After I found the Team Plasma Grunt and Frustration TM, I sprinted back to Floccesy Town for our next two battles. This first trainer was defeated the usual way, but for the second trainer, my team was healed, including their PP, so I couldn't use Struggle to defeat this guy, and instead, I lowered their attack and had to PP stall them by switching around with Lillipup that was immune to their lick, so they would kill themselves with their own Struggle, while my Pokemon also went down at the same time. With those two trainers defeated, I could head back to Route 19 for 5 Oran Berries and continue forward to the first gym, which was a big step up in difficulty, as the normal trainers here had 2 Pokemon, and the more Pokemon trainers had, the harder this challenge becomes, as with every Pokemon I face, I must sacrifice one of mine to recoil damage to prevent myself from gaining experience. For this first trainer, I led with Lillipup, and first I went for Leer to boost my next tackle's damage that did just over 50%. Then with another Leer, my first Lillipup went down. Now, a different Lillipup could come in, and you struggled to just barely defeat Patrat, and next up was a Lillipup. Lillipup was faster than Patrat, so to safely outspeed, I used my Mareep to paralyze them, and after weakening with another one of my Lillipups, I sent in Snivy and won with Struggle. The next trainer had the same team as the last, with the order they send them out reversed, so a similar strategy as last time was enough to give me the win, and right now I had to face Cheren, who for this challenge is easily one of the hardest fights in the game, as right now there aren't many Pokemon available for me to use, and the ones that are happen to be very underleveled. Cheren is also sporting 3 Pokemon in challenge mode, so I could at most only afford to use 2 of my Pokemon for 2 of his, and 1 of my Pokemon had to solo 1 of his Pokemon for me to win. Additionally, all of his Pokemon have work up to boost attack and scale their damage to the point that winning would be impossible. To even have the slightest chance at winning this fight, I stared at a damage calculator for around 2 hours and came up with a line that should give me victory. The first thing I had to do to beat Cheren was catch Pokemon to use, as from my calculations, they needed very specific stats for me to stand a chance. The first Pokemon I had to catch was a level 7 Riolu with the lowest defense possible of 9 to maximize counter's damage. Then I needed 2 Lillipups with the best defense possible of 14 to survive additional hits, and finally I needed a Mareep with both the highest possible defense of 11 and the highest possible HP of 22. A Mareep with those specific stats was very unlikely to appear, so while I waited, I began the second stage of preparation, and started fainting all of my Lillipups on wild Pokemon to slowly lower their friendship by 1. As I had to make sure they all had 0 friendship with me to max out the power of frustration. Once I was done with the first 2 steps, I now had to drop every Pokemon to the perfect amount of PP. This wasn't 0 like the last few times, each move had to be on a specific amount of PP. So just as I needed Struggle's recoil damage, it would become available to me. And while doing this, I needed to move as little as possible in the overworld, as after you take 255 steps, you have a 50% chance to gain friendship, which would reduce frustration's power. Also, you can only encounter 1 Pokemon on each tile at once, so no matter how much I danced around on a single tile, if I had already encountered a Pokemon there, another would not appear unless I moved. After over 20 hours of preparation, I was finally ready to face Cheren. For his starting Patrat, I led with Mareep and first used Thunder Wave to reduce his speed, while he used his turn to use Work Up. Now Mareep just spammed Growls until they were defeated and I could send in a Lillipup. This Lillipup would use Leer, and thanks to Mareep's attack drops, she could easily shrug off any of Patrat's tackles, and with 2 frustrations, I dropped Patrat in potion range, and Cheren healed while I used another frustration. And now I could stall turns by throwing Pokeballs to wait for my Lillipup's HP to be 6 or lower, and with Mareep's paralysis, I could outspeed and defeat Cheren's first Pokemon. His next Pokemon, Pidove, is where this fight could get a little annoying, as my strategy to beat it was for them to use Quick Attack on my Riolu, so I could deal massive damage back with Counter. Unfortunately, they weren't guaranteed to use Quick Attack, and usually they used either Leer or Work Up that could ruin my strategy and cause me to lose. Eventually, this all went as planned, and Riolu healed out of range of death with an Oranberry, and countered to place Pidove on low HP. There was another RNG check here, as they had to use another Quick Attack again here, to place Riolu in struggle range, which just barely allowed him to secure the KO. For Cheren's final Pokemon, Lillipup, I sent out Mareep. Because this Mareep had the best possible defense and HP, if I'm lucky, Cheren's Lillipup won't see a kill with Tackle, and will instead use Work Up so I could freely use Thunder Wave. With Lillipup's attack up, it will now see a kill with both Bite and Tackle, but since my Mareep outspeeds, I can use Growl to lower their attack back to normal, which makes it a 50-50 of them using Bite, which can't kill, or Tackle that could kill. Luckily, this time they got fully paralyzed. Now I could just spam Growl until Mareep went down, and then I could send in my final Lillipup, who went for 1 Leer into frustration to account for Cheren's Lillipup's Oranberry's healing. Then I used another Leer into 2 frustrations, placing Lillipup on the perfect HP. So I just had to stall turns by throwing Pokeballs until my Lillipup was in struggle range, and then, finally, another struggle would defeat Cheren and collect me my first badge without me gaining any EXP. Next, I sneaked my way through the rest of Route 20 and avoided the final double battle by only having a single Pokemon in my party. In Verbank City, I could immediately challenge the gym, but first, I headed to the dark grass in the Verbank complex to catch some Growlithes, for their decent speed and chance to burn with Ember, then Elekid for their static ability, and finally Magnemite, who was incredible with their Steel type to be immune to a lot of moves in Roxy's gym, and they also got Sonic Boom that dealt a consistent 20 damage, which was pretty good damage, and it was consistent, so it made it easy to drop an opponent in range to die to Struggle. Once I was done catching and setting my team up to use Struggle, I took on the first gym trainer, who was pretty easy. For Grimer, I just used Elekid to drop them to red HP and finished them off with Growlithe. I pretty much did the same thing for the next coughing, and the next trainer didn't pose any challenge, and I defeated them with ease, so now it was time to face Roxy. Unlike Cherin, I didn't need to do any specific preparations to beat her. For her first coughing, I sent out Magnemite, who resisted all of its attacks, so it was safe for me to use 2 Sonic Booms to activate its berry, while my Magnemite also healed with a berry. Then with Thunder Shock, I dropped it into potion range, and with 2 more Sonic Booms, they were in range of Magnemite Struggle. Roxy's next Pokemon, Grimer, was a little harder to deal with, as it had Mud Slap to hit Magnemite for 4 times super effective damage. So I needed 2 Pokemon to win here. The first was a Magnemite who used Sonic Boom and Return, then fainted, and the second Magnemite just used another Sonic Boom and Struggle for the win. Whirlipede was easily Roxy's most annoying Pokemon, and I couldn't really think of a consistent strat to beat them, forcing me to rely on an unreliable burn with Growlithe, who with a berry could live 2 Venishocks, and then use Thief to steal Whirlipede's Citrus Berry to stop it from healing. Once my first Growlithe went down, I sent in my next one, and after 3 turns, my Growlithe was defeated, and at the same time, Whirlipede fainted to burn, earning me my next gym badge. After making a movie at the PokeStar studio where there are some funny Pokemon, I headed to the port to beat up a Grunt, which was easy along with the other Grunt on Route 20, meaning now we could set sail and arrive at Castelia City. First things first, I picked up the Rest TM, which was really useful for helping a Pokemon reach low PP, as it gave them a consistent way to recover HP, so now I didn't have to keep saving and resetting if I took too much damage. Anyway, I now caught a Minccino on Route 4 and proceeded on in the story by heading to the sewers where there was a battle against 2 Grunts where we were backed up by Hugh. The problem with this fight is Hugh's Pignite outspeeds most of my Pokemon and it one-shots one of the Grunt's Pokemon, so this would actually cause me to gain experience for the kill, which I couldn't allow to happen. So I ended up placing all Pokemon but Minccino in the box, then I dropped Minccino to low HP, and in battle, Minccino speed-tied Pignite, so if I was lucky, I could use Tickle to lower his attack so they wouldn't kill with Flame Charge. Then the Grunts would attack and defeat my Minccino, and with no Pokemon available to me, I could just leave it to Hugh to solo the fight, and this was a pretty consistent strat for double battles where we're paired with an NPC. Outside of the sewers, we could now head to the gym. The normal trainers here were pretty easy, as with an Ember and a few Leers, I could easily drop the Swaddle in range to die to struggle. The other gym trainers weren't anything different, but the gym leader Berg was no joke. Like with Cherin, it took me a very long time to figure out a way to beat him. The only new Pokemon I had to catch for this battle was a Darumaka to help take down Berg's Leavanny. Then additionally, I had to encounter a few Pokemon to fill out my Pokedex to pick up the Eviolite from this guy. Once I thought I was done preparing, I talked to Berg at the top of the gym, and the battle began. My strat for his first Pokemon, Dwebble, was pretty bad, as I overestimated how powerful it is because of Rock Blast that the AI doesn't actually use. Anyway, my plan to win here was awful. I literally planned to just use Rock Blast with Rock'n'Roller and hope I get lucky with the number of hits so it sets me up to win with Struggle. As you can expect, this was extremely unreliable, but I did eventually secure a double KO, moving me on to his next Pokemon, Shelmet. My original strat to beat this was to just use Wing Attack, but I quickly realized that this wouldn't work because I forgot this thing had Curse to boost its defense to the point that I had no chance to win considering its Shell Armor ability. Yeah, so this plan didn't work, so I spent a little time coming up with a new plan to win, and it was far more reliable. So now I led with Timber, who resisted all of Dwebble's moves and could heal with leftovers. At first here, I used Rock Throw to account for their berry, then I used Work Up twice to double attack and used 2 more Rock Throws so they were in potion range, then 2 more Rock Throws placed them on low HP, and if Timber wasn't in range to faint to Struggle, here I could just throw Pokeballs and then use Struggle to take Dwebble down. For Berg's Shelmet, I sent in Darumaka, and my plan here was to use Fire Fang to do around 75% of their max HP. Then I set up to +2 attack with Work Up, while they set up defensive buffs with Curse, and then I used Strength. Now I just waited for Darumaka to be in range to die to Struggle, and then I could attack and more often than not secure the KO. With Hard Rock Onyx, I used Rock Tomb on Carablast to drop their speed, so then I could outspeed and use Rock Throw, then with a weak Rage I would always be in range to kill them with a Struggle. And their Endure was no problem, as when I attacked with Struggle, Onyx was in range to die to an attack, so they'd always attack on that turn. After sending in Eviolite Darumaka, Berg sent in his best Pokemon by far, Leavanny. Not only does it hit extremely hard for this point in the game, but it outspeeds every Pokemon I can catch, and it has Grass Whistle to put me asleep and eliminate any chance I could win. I had 2 outs to beat this thing. The first unreliable one was to use Fire Fang to burn them and aim for both of our Pokemon to go down at the same time, which was awkward to time and it didn't really work that well. The more consistent plan was to tank 2 Aerial Aces with Eviolite's 50% defense boost and then use Fire Fang into Strength. After using Strength, I let this Darumaka faint, and now was another RNG check as Leavanny had to attack to place my next Darumaka on 5 HP, and this struggle had to kill, which it did, and I collected my 3rd gym badge. Heading over to Route 4, Coltress cleared the way forward and challenged us to a battle. With Drillbur's 2 Mud Slaps, I set up Minchino to struggle Magnemite down, and with 2 Sonic Booms and a few returns, Blink was equally easy. So now, let me give you a casual reminder to like and subscribe, and next in Nimbasa City, I had to team up with Nate to beat Ingo and Emmet. Like the previous double battle with Hugh, I just let my Pokemon faint so Nate could solo the fight, giving me no EXP. With the way cleared, I could now enter the battle subway, which is home to many extremely useful items, like the Explosion TM, which is perfect for this challenge, as not only does it deal huge damage, but it also causes the user to faint and not gain any EXP. So now I wanted to farm BP to get the TM, and the easiest way to farm BP right now was to just use the multi-battle train where I could team up with the NPC Nate, who could carry me to victory, while all I had to do was like mash A. After 2 hours, I had enough BP, and with the TM in hand, there was a new Pokemon I wanted to catch. With the Trubbish on Route 5 that are pretty fast, and can also learn Explosion from the TM. With 5 nukes added to my team, I easily blew my way past all trainers in the original Electric Gym, and had a similarly easy time in the Electric Gym for real. My team was just really strong now. So naturally I thought I'd be ready to take on Elisa without too much preparation, and I wasn't. My explosions didn't deal nearly enough damage to one-shot, and her switching around with Volt Switches made it tricky to focus down a single Pokemon. After some planning, I headed back to Route 5, and instead of looking for a high-level Trubbish, I searched for a level 22 Trubbish, as at this level it knows the move Toxic Spikes, which poisons a Pokemon when it's switched in. Additionally, I picked up some Onix below Castelia City, and now I was ready to face Elisa. For her first Emolga, I sent out my level 22 Trubbish, who had specifically more special defense than regular defense and an Eviolite, making Elisa not very likely to use Volt Switch. So I could set up a layer of Toxic Spikes, and unfortunately she still used Volt Switch. But I exploded on the Flaffy for decent damage and sent in my first Onix to set up Stealth Rock. With their incredible defense, Flaffy's takedowns couldn't leave a scratch on Onix, and after Elisa healed with a potion, I could lower their speed with Rock Tomb, and now I just had to wait for the perfect moment to explode and defeat them. Next up, Emolga came out, but not really, as it used Volt Switch to send in Joltik, who easily folded to Stealth Rock damage and an explosion. To actually deal with Emolga, I used another Onix and used some Rock Tombs to slow them down to the point that it could outspeed and then blow up, causing Elisa to send out her final Pokemon, Zebstrika. Another Onix could easily solo it with the help of Toxic Spikes for damage, and to stay alive from her pursuits that dealt around 10 damage, I used Rest to stay healthy. When the time was right, I exploded and won the battle. After I destroyed 2 grunts, I proceeded on to Route 5 where I found Heartbreaker Charles, and this fight is the reason I'm playing White 2, as on White 2 this is a triple battle, which I can win without gaining experience, but on Black 2 this is a rotation battle, and all Pokemon gain experience in rotation battles, so I would actually lose the challenge here if I played that game. As for the fight in White 2, it was still pretty tough, as in order to avoid any of my Pokemon from gaining experience, I need to defeat every single Pokemon at the same time. For my first few attempts, I tried just exploding with everyone, which didn't work. So then I brought in a Swadloon in the middle and 2 Emolga to the left and right. With Emolga, I used 2 Sparks to paralyze and weaken Sigalith, while Swadloon used Protect, and since Archon and Sigalith saw a kill on Swadloon, they attacked into them for very little damage. Next turn, I sacked my Sword Loon and sent in Trubbish while my Emolga used Spark to weaken both Archon and then Tortuga. For my last turn, I attacked Tortuga again and destroyed everything with Explosion, blowing the way forward to Driftvale City. After an easy fight against Rude, I journeyed north to Chargestone Cave to catch some decent Boldor, which were pretty useful since they had Sturdy to always survive an attack and Explosion to deal devastating damage. While I was here, I quickly thought of a plan for Clay, and to execute the plan, I needed to catch 2 Pokemon, and both had around a 5% chance of appearing in the rustling grass. The first was Leavanny and the second was Azumarill, and specifically one with huge power to double its attack. The trainers in the ground gym were not really that hard, but before I fought Clay, I farmed some BP so I could buy a Life Orb, which not only boosts damage by 30%, but it also gives every move a slight amount of recoil. So if I went into a fight with a Pokemon on really low HP, they could use any move I wanted and still feint to Life Orb damage, and I plan to use this for the next fight against Clay. Originally, I assumed a 50% speed boost from a Choice Scarf would allow Trubbish to outspeed Krokorok, but I assumed wrong, so I just blew up with a Choice Banded Boldor to one-shot them. With Eviolite Ferroseed, I plan to use Iron Defense to take the hit of Sandslash and slowly deal back chip damage with Iron Barbs. Metal Claws gave me a little more damage here, and after using up Clay's potion, Ferroseed could use Explosion for a double KO. For the next Pokemon Onix, I didn't calculate Leavanny's damage, and despite being 4 times effective and having a Life Orb, one-shotting Onix with Razor Leaf here was not likely to happen. So next time I had Leavanny on 52 HP, enough to use a single Razor Leaf, placing Onix below 50% of their max HP, baiting in an Explosion that would just barely defeat my Leavanny, and move me on to Clay's final Pokemon. Here I just used an Aqua Tail with Azumarill to place it in range to die to a Boldor Explosion. With the 5th badge added to my collection, I was forced to compete in the PWT, which doesn't award any experience, so all the fights there were pretty free. As for the fights against Team Plasma, those were easy. I just used the normal plan of explode for the single battles and kill my team and get carried on the double battles. After getting moved, I could entirely explore the Chargestone Cave and reach Mistralton City, and north from this city was a hiker who I could trade an Emolga to get a plus attack nature level 35 Gigalith, which is really strong. Before I took on Skylar's gym, I picked up a few Pokemon in the lower floors of Chargestone Cave, as there they were a higher level than on the top floor. With this team, I just avoided all trainers in the gym and challenged Skylar. For her first Pokemon Swoobat, exploding was enough to take it down. Then for Skarmory, I used an Eviolite Ferroseed to chip it down with the Iron Barb's damage, and I could keep Ferroseed healthy by using Rest. When Skylar's potion was used and the time was right, I could kill everyone with Explosion. Thanks to Gigalith's monstrous attack, an Explosion was enough to one-shot Sigilif, and for Swanna, my Boldor's Sturdy would allow it to take one hit and counter with Rock Slide, which wasn't enough, so I sent in another Boldor, and since Swanna didn't use Roost, this Explosion ended the battle, and with our 6th gym badge in hand, we boarded an actual aeroplane and flew over to a volcano. In the dark grass here, there were a couple of good Pokemon like Camerupt that could learn Explosion, and Skarmory who has a really good typing and Sturdy. In this section, we team up with Bianca, and there was only one noteworthy fight here, a forced double battle. Luckily, I got away with just spamming Explosion, so it wasn't that bad. After leaving the cave, we were interrupted by Hugh, and his first Pokemon, Unpheasant, was frustrating with its Detect to block my Explosion. So I came up with a plan of clicking Curse with Camerupt and waiting for them to use the 2-turn charging move, Razor Wind, as then I knew that on the 2nd turn they couldn't detect and I could one-shot them with Explosion. Simipour was as simple as clicking Explosion, and for Emboar, I just used Curse to survive a 2nd takedown and one-shot him with Explosion. Past Route 13 was a humble town and a fight where we had to team up with Hugh against Zinzolan. I had some trouble here, as while I could easily carry my weight with a single Choice Scarfed Explosion, Hugh's team underperformed and he actually got wiped here. Fortunately, on my next try, I just watched as his team destroyed everything. From here to the next gym, there was nothing of note, but before I challenged the gym, I caught some level 44 Mark and Garboda, who both could learn Explosion, and with these powerhouses, I teared my way through the first 2 gym trainers. But for the third trainer, I had to pick between a rotation battle, which would be impossible, and a triple battle, which took a little more thinking than the last 2 fights. I led this fight with 2 Marks and Garboda, with the Garboda going for Sludge Bomb that did around 50% to the enemy fracture. Then they used 3 Dragon Claws for significant damage, which caused my Mark Sludge Wave to defeat my center Mark, which was fine, as now was the perfect time to send in Gigalith, then use Sludge Bomb with Garboda, setting the enemy team up to get wiped by a Choice Banded Explosion. Despite what you might think, the leader here, Drayden, was really easy. I simply just used a Sludge Bomb and Explosion for Drotagon, then for Flygon I used an Explosion that they just barely survived. But after they healed, a Body Slam into an Explosion was enough to defeat them. Then for Altaria, I had to be careful with their Cotton Guard's defense boosts, so I used Toxic on them, and perfectly timed using Explosion to line up for when they would faint to poison damage. Drayden's ace fell to a single explosion, and after Team Plasma attacked with their big boat, I easily won the 5 battles against them and traversed the marine tube to reach the area with the 8th gym. Once I found Marlon to the north, I entered inside the gym and challenged him to a battle. After a few attempts of using my current team, I determined that I needed to think it over to actually win here, which led me back to Route 11 to catch Virizion for a fast, decently strong grass type. After giving them Energy Ball and a Life Orb, I weakened them to low HP and poisoned them to set them up to face Marlon. His first Pokemon Wailord required a little bit of good RNG, as sometimes he'd go straight for big damage with Earthquake, but sometimes he'd just go for Rain Dance, which gave me a turn to Toxic him, and next turn I could set up a Toxic Spike. Then I could Explode for Lethal, and Caracosta was next. This was another Pokemon that I needed at least decent RNG to beat, as after I used Energy Ball, they would heal with a Citrus Berry. Right now, I wanted them to click Shell Smash, as Marlon would then heal with a potion, and another Energy Ball would drop them to 1 HP because of Sturdy, and with Life Orb and poison damage, my Virizion would faint at the same time they did. His next Pokemon Mantine was another small RNG check, as I could be burned by Scald here, but I wasn't and exploded for Lethal. Marlon's last Pokemon, Jellicent, was one of his most scary, because it was a Ghost type and immune to Explosion. So I actually brought in a Basculin to use Soak to remove the Ghost type and turn it into a pure Water type. Basculin may have now gone down to Energy Ball, but with a Screech into an Explosion, even a burn couldn't stop me from destroying Jellicent. With my 8th badge in hand, I now had to deal with Team Plasma, who were south near a cave where I realized I actually had to head north to talk to Coltrus, and now I could actually reach the Team Plasma boat. The first difficult fight here was a double battle, and since Hugh's Ember was pretty quick because of its level, I had trouble with it one-shotting the Grunt's Mons. I wasn't bothered enough to box my team, so I just led with my HM Mon, Ducklet, who was defeated in a single hit while Ember smashed Golbat. My choice scarfed Garboda now quickly fainted with Explosion, making it safe for Ember to kill Seviper. Then my next Garboda was luckily one-shot by a crit Night Slash, so Ember could defeat another Pokemon with Flamethrower. Now an Explosion with Muck was enough to secure me the win. Once I solved the passcode, there was another battle against Zinzolan, which was much easier than the last. I just got one shot on my first turn and mashed Explosion for devastating damage, resulting in a very simple fight, and next we had to head off to the Giant Chasm, which was home to 3 Pokemon I wanted. The first was Metagross, who is a Steel type, has really good stats, and learns Explosion. The other Pokemon I wanted to catch here was an Excadrill and Mamoswine, which were going to be very useful for the next important boss fight. Anyway, in the Team Plasma boat there was this double battle, which was our first encounter with an enemy team with 6 Pokemon, which is very significant, as if I trade KOs on the enemy team, I'll end the battle with 0 Pokemon, and I'll lose the battle if I try to maintain a 0 EXP run. So here, and for any other battles against a team of 6, I need to use a single revive so at least one of my Pokemon is alive at the end of battle so I can actually win. As for the battle itself, itself, it was surprisingly as simple as me just clicking Explosion a few times. Further inside, I had to activate 4 switches to open the path forward to admins in Zolan, who was extremely easy, but the next battle against Coltrus was the complete opposite, as he had many Pokemon with Sturdy, so my Life Orb recoil strat wouldn't work, and also his team was mostly comprised of Steel types, so Explosion wouldn't be nearly as effective. After around an hour of preparation, this is the plan I came up with. First off, I led with Mamoswine for Magnezone and used the move Hail to break their Sturdy, while Mamoswine barely endured a Flash Cannon, placing it on the ideal HP so it would feint to Life Orb's recoil after earthquaking down Magneton. Metang was really simple to beat, it just got one-shot by Excadrill, then an explosion with Metagross beat Beheeyem. For Magnezone, I had 2 different plans to beat it. One was reliant on just barely going down to recoil, and the other, that I ended up using on my winning run, was getting Magnezone to explode while they killed my Excadrill at the same time. His final Pokemon Klinklang was not too complicated, just use Hammer Arm, take some Thunderbolts, and end their life with Metagross's Explosion. With Coltrus defeated, I could fight the Shadow Triad, who didn't really put up much of a fight. Similarly, the next battle against Kyurem was easy, but immediately after this, we had to fight Ghetsis. His lead Cofagrigus was difficult to handle since it was immune to Explosion, so I lost the battle and now did some preparations by finding the Toxic TM in the Seaside Cave and by picking up the Protect TM in the Battle Subway for 6 BP. With these moves on one of my Metagross, I was ready to re-challenge Ghetsis. His first Pokemon, Cofagrigus, was easily one of his best. The way I planned to deal with it was to use Toxic to deal big poison damage and use Protect to stall turns to deal even more damage and heal my Metagross with leftovers. Because Cofagrigus' Shadow Balls were pretty strong, I needed to also use Meteor Mash for some extra chip to speed up the killing process. Eventually, when I saw my chance to win, I let Metagross faint to a Shadow Ball, while Cofagrigus fainted at the same time to Toxic. Next, I used another Metagross to just explode on Seismitoad for an easy one-shot. Then for Electros, I knew I could outspeed it, so I could fire off 1 Psychic to guarantee that my next explosion would defeat it. Ghetsis' next 2 Pokemon were easily dealt with by a single explosion, but on Toxicroak I had to revive a Pokemon in the back since Ghetsis had 6 Pokemon and I'd lose if I didn't do that. For his final Pokemon, I merely exploded again, and with that, Team Plasma was dealt with and I could advance along Route 23, pass the badge test, and reach Victory Road. Inside, most trainer battles were pretty straightforward, and the only real challenge here was the final battle at the end against Hugh. The 2 most problematic Pokemon on his team for this fight were Bouffalante, who could take an explosion while outspeeding Metagross with a devastating Earthquake, and Emboar, who could also live an explosion and use powerful moves while outspeeding Metagross. With Infezant's U-turn, one of these Pokemon would immediately come out, so I had to alter my team slightly, and I ended up leading with Skarmory, who resisted U-turn so they would never use it. First, as you would expect, I used Toxic to slowly deal damage, and Protect to stall for turns. While I did this, Infezant unleashed very powerful facades, and I had to end the battle quickly. Next, I set up a layer of spikes, then protected again. When Infezant was in potion range, I could set up another layer of spikes, and when the time was right, I let Skarmory go down at the same time as Infezant. Simipour now died to Explosion, and for Bouffalante I used the spikes damage from Skarmory to one-shot it with Metagross's Explosion. With the spike damage's chip, now my Basculin could use Surf to drop Emboar to low HP, and a Scarfed Metagross could then explode to win me the battle. Next up, I had to do the Elite Four, which were really difficult as it's 5 boss fights in a row, and one of them specializes in Ghost types, so going in with a team of Explosion Pokemon wasn't going to work. To construct a team to beat them, I needed all the help I could get, and the EV boosting feather items on this bridge and the EV boosting consumable items in this big store were really strong ways to get me an advantage over the final 5 fights. Boosting items like HP up don't work in this gen when your HP EV reaches 100. And since I can't gain EXP in this challenge, feathers were one of the only ways to boost an EV above 100. The issue is these only boost an EV by 1, and if I wanted to max a stat out, I would need to farm like over 100 of them, which would take a really long time. So to save myself time from grinding them out, I used the shops in Join Avenue, which can boost an EV by 4 with the lowest level shop. Usually this can only be done once a day, but I'm playing on an emulator, so I just changed the time on my PC to be able to immediately buy more of these. As for the Pokemon that I wanted to max a stat on, it was Basculin, as above level 51, they know the move Final Gambit, which causes the user to faint, then deal damage equal to the damage they took, and by maxing out a Basculin's HP EVs, the damage here was incredible, and more than enough to one-shot many of the Elite Four's Pokemon. Also, for the Basculin I used, I wanted them to have the best HP possible, so I used Repels to prevent myself from encountering them below their max level of 55, and then in battle, I used Final Gambit with them to scout out the HP of the Wild Basculin, and if they survived a Final Gambit, I knew they would have a high HP stat and would be a great addition to my team. Other than catching Basculin, I caught a level 55 Petilil in the dark grass around Victory Road and evolved them into Lilligant. After finalizing the stats of my team, I was ready to face the Elite Four. I wanted to tackle these guys in order of most difficult to least difficult, so I started with Chantal and her team of ghost types. The plan for her Cofagrigus was pretty much the same as Ghetsis' one. Use toxic damage and my new Leech Seed's turn-by-turn damage to slowly but surely inflict damage, then with Protects and Synthesis to stay healthy, survival wasn't a problem. The only issue was it was a little hard to time exactly when Lilligant would faint because of Leech Seed's damage. Eventually I managed, and for Drifbloom I used Metagross. With Toxic, Protect, Meteor Mash, and then Explosion, I would always die just at the right time as they were defeated. For Golurk, I used a Life Orb boosted Waterfall for a double KO, and then I used a very similar plan for Bayonet with Surf. Chantal's final Pokemon, Chandelure, was probably the hardest Pokemon on her team, as not only was it powerful, but it was very quick because of a Choice Scarf's 50% speed boost. Since the Choice Scarf would lock it into a move, I plan to use Skarmory with Protect to stall out one of Fire Blast's 5 PP. After dodging, they could then use Fly to dodge another Fire Blast. Now I let Skarmory take a Fire Blast, which they survived thanks to Sturdy. Then with Protect, Chandelure was out of PP and could only use Struggle. So by carefully managing Skarmory's HP, both Pokemon went down at the same time and I was victorious. Next up was Marshall. For Throw, the normal plan with Lilligant applied here. I just used my turn-by-turn chip damage to beat them, and at the same time, my Lilligant fainted. For Sork, I just used Psychic into Explosion, nothing special there. And for Marshall's next 3 Pokemon, Basculin with Final Gambit should have been enough to beat all 3 of them. But I forgot to teach one of my Basculins Protect to wait for Conkeldurr to burn itself with a Flame Orb, so I just had to take a risk with Waterfall and hope that they clicked Bulk Up, which they did, so I won on the next turn with Final Gambit. From Caitlyn onward, I thought things would only get easier, but her Musharna was more trouble than expected. To beat them, I had planned to use Lilligant holding a Flame Orb to inflict burn, so their Hypnosis and Dream Eater combo wouldn't work. Unfortunately, this meant that their only damaging move was Charge Beam, which didn't do much damage, so it was difficult to perfectly time a double KO with toxic damage. Then for Reuniclus, because Reflect was up, I had to go for 2 Meteor Mashes into Explosion. Now the final 3 Mons could easily be beat solely with Final Gambit. With that easy fight beaten, I moved on to another fairly easy battle against Grimsley. For the first 2 Pokemon, an Explosion and Final Gambit would do, but for Crocodile, I had to use a Toxic Stall strat. Originally, I planned to use Skarmory for this, but it didn't work well, and next time I found using Lilligant to be much easier. So after an easy Toxic Stall, I could use 2 more Final Gambits to defeat the final 2 Pokemon, and now the Elite Four was defeated, so I rode down the elevator, climbed up the stairs, and was faced with the champion, Iris. For her first 2 Pokemon, I just annihilated them with Final Gambit, and for her third, Archeops, I wanted to revive one of my fainted Pokemon because she has 6 Pokemon and I have to use a revive here. The issue I found here is my Metagross wasn't actually as tanky as I expected them to be, even with them resisting all of Archeops' moves, and I lost my first attempt here. After a little thinking, I gave my Metagross Rock Slide, which dealt just over 50% to Archeops, which activated its defeatist ability to significantly lower attack. So now was the perfect time to use the mandatory revive and blow up to defeat it. Next, Aggron was easily defeated with Final Gambit, and now she sent out her scariest Pokemon, Lapras. With its high HP, a single Final Gambit wouldn't one-shot it, and its powerful moves, Thunder and Blizzard, made it unreliable to Toxic Stall, which was my original plan, but to do that, I had to survive a Blizzard, which I apparently had over a 50% chance to survive, but it didn't feel like that, as it killed Lilligant like 10 times in a row. So eventually I changed my plan and led this fight with Lilligant against Hydreigon. Like with Lapras, this wasn't exactly a reliable matchup because of Hydreigon's Fire Blast that could sometimes one-shot, but with Protect and its unreliable accuracy, I could stall some turns, and if I was lucky enough, I could stall out all of Fire Blast's 5 PP, and now the moves it could use were far less powerful, and Toxic stalling now was fairly easy. And with this strat, I also used up Iris's only full restore. Once Hydreigon was defeated, the next 3 Pokemon were defeated the same way as before, but for Lapras, I used Basculin and first attacked with Double Edge. Since Lapras could only use fairly unreliable moves like Thunder with 70 accuracy and Sing with 55% accuracy, it wasn't a stretch to dodge here and finish it off with Final Gambit. Now for Iris's ace, Haxorus, it had a Focus Sash, so one-shotting it with Final Gambit wouldn't work. So I planned to stall it with Skarmory, who resisted all of their attacks. With Protect and Fly, I managed to survive a few turns, but that didn't matter, as Haxorus began setting up Dragon Dances, and with its Mold Breaker ability, it could break through my Skarmory's sturdy. But I had already accounted for this, and after a Protect, it was time to let Haxorus land an Outrage that one-shot, and once it went down to Toxic, Iris was defeated and I beat the game without ever gaining a single point of EXP. Like the video if you want me to do this challenge again, and that's it, the video's done.